Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And before I came out here today, I was like, I'm going to get myself a treat from the pantry. And I looked in there and there were two treats that I like. There's one that I kind of like, hot tamales. They're good. But then there was one that I really like, which is here in this foil pack. Maybe you can hear what it is. That's cherry Pop-Tart. Oh my goodness. Those are delicious. So I opted for the cherry Pop-Tart, even though I also really like the other one, because it's possible to like two things at once, but just to like one of them more. Likewise, when we're here at the beginning of John with this passage, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. That word, or logos, that we've been discussing, is a concept that would have conjured two meanings in the mind of the original audience. And I would submit to you that there was a large percentage of John's audience who were sympathetic to, influenced by, a hot tamales level appreciation of the lowercase l logos word Greek diminished concept we've been talking about over the past few episodes. But despite having the capacity to look at that and say like, okay, that's one way of thinking of it. It's kind of a story that sort of makes sense of existence a little bit. It's a myth. This part of John's audience, I think much more would have read those first couple of verses in John and been like, oh, well, yeah, the word being used there reminds me of how the Greeks think about it. But the concept being discussed there, come on. It's a nod to the mighty and powerful word of the Lord from the Old Testament. The word of the Lord who called being out of non-being. Then J.R.R. Tolkien, he wrote a prequel to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit called The Silmarillion. I haven't read it for a long time, but I really liked it when I did read it. And in it, there is this creation epic where the god of Middle-earth, whose name is Iluvatar sings existence into existence. And as I recall it, and again, it's been a long time, that was a beautiful passage and kind of a cool way to artfully nod to the creation account of the Bible that's being alluded to here in John chapter 1 and that's overtly described in Genesis chapter 1. Yeah, this is what I'm saying. In the same way that it's very possible for me to say, oh, I like hot tamales. I get why people like hot tamales. I just more like cherry Pop-Tarts. So I think a big chunk of John's audience would have been able to say, I get the Greek myth, that's cool. But what John is saying here way more reminds me of the grand creation epic of Genesis and the Old Testament motif of the powerful word of the Lord in action. Now, at this point in the conversation, maybe some of you are going, hey, I thought you said yesterday that we were going to move ahead into John 1, 3, 4, and 5. And you are right. I did say that yesterday. But from time to time, I get done with the conversation and I get set to get back over here to the microphone. And I think, but there was another thing I wanted to talk about. And this time around, I was like, I wanted to talk about the Old Testament and the powerful word of the Lord and read more verses that have to do with that. And I wanted to talk about how often it comes up in the Old Testament. I just got all rushy. I didn't get in as much as I wanted from Bible stuff from the Old Testament about the powerful word of the Lord that I think John is nodding to here, that I think his audience would have thought of more than the Greek stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the Greek stuff is going to come up more, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But first, we're going to take some more time on the powerful word of the Lord in the Old Testament here today, starting with the obvious one, which is, of course, the creation account in Genesis 1:3. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. Okay, I'm with you, John. Well, hold on there, John, for just a minute. Let me pause your book here. Let me think about some other stuff I might remember from the Old Testament where God says something and it's powerful and it does something. Oh, well, how about the covenant that sets the whole thing in motion? Genesis 15:1. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. Well, this is a crucial, clarifying moment in the whole deal between God and Abraham to make him a great nation and to give him a land and to make it so that all the nations will be blessed through him. How did that covenant that is basically the story arc of the Bible come into being? Well, by the creative and powerful word of the Lord. Well, what about 1 Samuel chapter 3? There's a moment where the boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under the priest Eli. And in those In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. But then about 20 verses later, it says, the Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word. The powerful word of the Lord through the prophet Nathan corrects David after the whole affair with Bathsheba, and then sending her husband Uriah the Hittite out into battle and leaving him for dead. Well, when Nathan the prophet confronts David, he says to David, you are the man, not like you're the man, not in the compliment way, like you're the guy who did the bad thing I just told you about. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. It is by the word and the revelation of God. God's judgment is revealed by his word, and then that just keeps on happening throughout the prophets again and again. And then the word of the Lord just keeps on showing up with prophets in the tradition of Nathan. Again and again, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. The word of the Lord came to Isaiah, and Isaiah says, here I am, send me. And he says, go and tell this people. And he tells them what to go and say. The word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah and says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. The word of the Lord comes to Ezekiel when he's sitting there on that canal in the place that he's been hauled off to in captivity at Babylon. The word of the Lord comes to Jonah, and he fights as hard as he can to ignore it. It occurs to me that if I keep going at this rate, we're going to go way too far over time. Here's the punchline. I went through every book of the Old Testament, and this motif of the word of the Lord showed up in power appears at least once, inarguably at least once, in literally every single book of the Old Testament, except I couldn't find anything that quite fit that bill in Esther. Well, I couldn't find anything that came really even close to fitting that bill in the book of Esther. And even if you squint really hard, I don't think you can find anything in Song of Solomon or maybe Ecclesiastes. But pretty much every other book of the Bible either has a very direct nod to the concept of the powerful word of the Lord making things happen, either creating stuff or judging stuff or bringing clarity to stuff or ordaining stuff. Every book except the three I mentioned has either that overt language or the concept is very clearly there. This is not some obscure thing that I'm trying to read back into the Old Testament to fill up an episode with. No, this is a pervasive motif throughout the Old Testament. And I would submit to you that there were a whole bunch of people in John's audience who encountered the words of John's prologue here, the word logos stuff. And on the one hand, they were like, oh, I'm a little bit informed by the lesser Greek notion of these ideas. That's one way to think of it. It's kind of there. But I'm far more informed, and the idea that immediately pops for me when I see in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I'm far more informed by the idea of the powerful, creative, authoritative, judging, ordaining, light-giving, life-giving word of the Lord as described in every single book of the Old Testament except maybe 3. So, on balance, in my opinion, and there are people who are smarter than me who see this different, but this is my opinion, the first 2 verses of John are meant to rope in the outside audience by teasing a concept from the Greek world that John is going to deal with actually much more specifically in the next 3 verses, but much more so in these first 2 verses. John is trying to either remind an audience or invite a new audience into the idea of the powerful word of the Lord. A concept more powerful, more robust, and more meaningful than the diminished Greek notion of the logos or of the word. But I said a minute ago, and this is where I'm going to tease what we do tomorrow, that I think the next couple of verses actually are riffing more heavily on a very famous Greek concept that you probably know about and that we haven't talked about yet. And we're going to encounter a master stroke of philosophy and theology that would have appealed and made sense to everybody in that original audience from the Apostle John. It's going to be a ton of fun. Don't miss it. I'm going to go finish this Pop-Tart. Okay, everybody. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.